Well, good morning. Happy New Year. It is 2023. Just crazily enough, it seems like it was just 2020. As you see, we have our new first quarter lecture series up. So we are just going to do the flyer by the quarter this time. And Paul is starting out today with ground covers for the landscape. Shannon will be here in February for backyard poultry fundamentals. And then me, Brandy Keller, I'll be coming in March with the top T questions, tomatoes, turf, and trees. Not a small topic at all. Before we get on, I'm gonna put Paul up here. This will be his last. Here you are. You're highlighted. This is Paul's last homegrown lecture. He is moving on up to bigger and better things. Paul, do you just want to give a real quick explanation of where you're going to be going?
Absolutely. As of this week, Monday, I am now a program specialist. I'm still working for AgriLife Extension, of course, but my focus is going to be the green industry throughout the state. Working with Texas Nursery Landscape Association, working with the industry, developing research programs, applied research that the industry can use for their everyday production questions or issues that they may have. So it's something that A&M has, as AgriLife Extension has missed. It's been a gap, and I look forward to sort of getting my hands into it and trying to make some positive contributions to the industry.
All right. Well, I know we all started this together in 2020, so we're definitely going to miss you here. But I know we're going to gain information, as agents that you're going to be able to pass along as a program specialist. So, just for, the attendees and, everyone that's, all the part of the team, I just want to thank you for, everything that you've done and the leadership you've provided in your role. And you are going to be missed.
Well, this has been a fun ride. We didn't know what we were getting into back in 2020, and it's actually turned out to be a really positive contribution from the whole team. So, our team has recently won a state award from A&M, Superior Service, and that wouldn't have happened without Brandy and Shannon and Susan Hubert, who's behind the scenes making everything happen. So I think I'm most proud of that award because it's a team award, and we've been working real hard here the past 3 years or so making this thing happen. And we definitely want to thank you all for your support, for tuning in every month and reading our newsletters and listening to the podcast. Please continue to do that because it's our way of getting information out to you, hopefully that you enjoy and that you can use.
Yeah, absolutely. And look for more information in the next newsletter in February about that team award. And then also just a real quick plug, we always have an evaluation sent with with the recording link. And honestly, that these are free programs and that is the only cost. I know not everyone does them, but I just want you to know that we look at all of them. We look at everyone's response. And it is really important for us to be able to continue to offer these, as a free program because, we have to, be able to assess and see how you all, appreciate and what you're getting out of it. So if you can take that time, I think it'll, take less than 1 minute, maybe a minute and a half if you're computer's working slow, but it's really quick. So Paul, we can get on with your presentation with ground covers for the landscape.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you, Brandy. So let's get started here. So ground covers for the landscape, pretty straightforward, but let's see what we've got in store for you today. So just so we are all on the same page, what is a ground cover? And By definition, it is a low-growing plant. They often spread quickly and they form a dense cover. So think of it as a type of living mulch that you can use in the landscape. The unique thing with these ground covers is they can be vine type plants, they can be grassy type plants, or they can even be shrubs. So it could be herbaceous type or it could be woody. So it really covers a pretty wide array of plants that we can use in the landscape as a ground cover. Why do we want to use them? You know, we've got all these other plants, and so, you know, I always tell the master gardeners when I'm teaching their classes, you know, every plant, you know, you want the right plant in the right place. So one of the reasons why we want to use ground covers is they are low maintenance. Once they are established, you have very little to, you know, there's very little maintenance to them. You may have to prune them a little bit every now and then to clean them up. You know, you might have some dead foliage or things like that, but overall, once they are established, they are pretty self-sufficient. Um, the other thing, and especially in our area, you know, this past summer we had some drought conditions and things like that. So they are a water-wise alternative. Again, once established, um, very little maintenance with them, and they don't require a lot of water. The root system gets established, it gets down into that soil profile, and you know, you're not going to have to water it the way you would have to water your turf. And so in certain spots, these are a great solution. One of those solutions is if you've got a sloping area. Um, you've got a embankment or something. These work extremely well. They add some texture, they add some color, but they help with that erosion control on those slopes. And maintenance is much better because you don't you don't have to worry about mowing them. Once they are established, they take over that area and they will keep that soil profile in place. So excellent for slopes and erosion control. They improve water filtration. And we talk about that, especially in urban areas where runoff can be an issue since we've got a lot of you know, concrete going up. They work extremely well there, and they help with moderation of transpiration and temperature. So your soils aren't going to dry out quickly. The temperature around your house or around the structures that where you have these ground covers will be moderated, so you won't have that extreme. So again, think of them as a living mulch because they have a lot of positives as to why you want to use them in your landscape. Aesthetically, just like anything else, they add interest. They contrast. You can add contrast in color. You can add contrast in textures. You're gonna, you know, I'll go through a brief list here. We'll have broadleaf type ground covers. We'll have grass type ground covers, and so it gives you a good a palette, another tool in that toolbox in order to really tie that landscape together. You can use them in beds or you can use them in open areas. So you can see in this image here, you know, in this house, we've got a slight sloping area. They've got some ground covers there. Under that tree, it was probably difficult to grow any type of turf. Mainly probably because of that's a large tree, so probably due to the root competition and also the shade. So the ground cover works extremely well there. So again, always think about solutions when you're working with your picking the plants that you want to use in your landscape. Um, we've got ground covers that will work well in the sun or the shade. Hard to maintain areas. There's areas where you know, sometimes there's compaction issues, sometimes there's water issues, maybe it stays too wet, and some of these ground covers might like that. You know, evaluate where you want to use them and then figure out which ones would work best. Ultimately, though, they really do tie the landscape together. They do unify that area. In this image, I like the way they used it in that entryway there as you come up the stairs. I think the landscape by the house could probably use a little bit more help and color and add some depth and texture there. But I do like the way, you know, coming off the street, the way they frame that walkway. And they can soften elements also, whether it's a hardscape, maybe it's something that you have in the landscape, whether it's a statue or something like that. But overall, they can soften the elements and really bring a nice look to it. Ground covers also fall into, they've got a sort of a utilitarian use. So this image is from Chicago. I took this past fall. I think the Willis building we were up. So that's 94 floors, I believe we were up. And as you look down, you can see the green roofs that Chicago uses. And majority of the plants that are used for green roofs are ground cover type plants, sedums, succulents, things like that, low growing plants. So they work extremely well there because they cover a large space rather quickly, and they work well together because they can use multiple types of ground covers together. Fire breaks, which, when I was out in California, ice plant, different succulents and things were, especially if you were inland more, was required around that, around your landscape. And people use it in order as a sort of a barrier or a break, to sort of keep those flames away or embers away during fire season. Now in Texas, we're seeing that more often. Also, we're having fire issues. So depending on the area that you are living in, you definitely want to consider using some of these ground covers in that in around the house. Aesthetically, you can use it to hide some irrigation, lighting, security, uh, hardscapes that are there. And then the other thing is, don't forget about it. It's a source of food for the wildlife and also a habitat. Once these ground covers get established, different small animals can live amongst there. Some of these flower, they set berries. So it does add a food source, and it provides additional interest in your landscape. So the selection, I'm thinking about putting ground covers in. So what should I consider? One of the things is that speed of establishment. How quickly will it establish? And so some of these are faster growers, other ones aren't. As a rule of thumb, variegated plants are going to be a little bit slower to establish and fill in the area, as opposed to if there's just a green version of it. But I don't want to deter you from that, because you can manipulate it by changing the density that you plant. You may want to plant a variegated one at a higher density as opposed to the green one. So it's something you can get by. The other thing is, you want to consider that weed suppression. As I mentioned, these are a living mulch almost. So you will have some, until they get established, you will have to deal with some weeds. But once they are established, you're probably going to have very little in the way of weed population develop, because you're crowding out that area. It's providing shade so the weed seeds can't germinate. And it just, competition, they're not able to get a foothold. And if any weeds do come up, it's very easy to see them. You pull them out once established, and you move on your way. Canopy closure sort of ties in with that speed of establishment. The sooner you get that canopy closure, the better off you're going to be, or that area is going to be with regard to the look that you want. So that's one of the things you have to consider. And then depending on where you're using that ground cover, is there going to be foot traffic? And if there is, you definitely want to go with a type of ground cover that you can walk on. And so there are ones that are easier, that will tolerate it. And there's other ones that you probably wouldn't want to walk on, because it's going to have some issues, and it's just not going to feel right. So, be aware of that as you consider the ground cover that you want to use. Soil preparation, we always talk about this. If you do proper preparation, you're going to get better establishment. So you want to remove your weeds. You want to work that soil at least to a depth of 6 to 8 inches. This is, common from what we talk about with regard to earth kind. Work at 6 to 8 inches and then apply a 3-inch layer of organic matter, predominantly compost, and work it into that soil profile. This will help improve the soil and will definitely help with the root establishment and the plant establishment for that ground cover. If you haven't done a soil test, which is something else I would definitely recommend, you can go as a base, you can apply a 10-10-10 to the area at a rate of 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. And this would be a good starter charge to get those plants up and running. Planting, when can you plant them? Pretty much any time of year, but the famous extension answer, it depends. Okay. What I would recommend is especially down here, you can pretty much plant any time of year. Just be aware in the summer, if you plant, if you really have to put them in, then you're going to have to watch your water. They're going to need more water depending on the conditions. This time of year is great. You can get them in. The root systems can start to establish, and coming out of the spring, they'll get a flush of new growth, and that root system will grow even more. So as you come into the summer, that plant's going to be able to hold up much better if we get some dry conditions. But they are quite versatile, and they are quite resilient. The spacing of them is really going to depend on the size of the plant you're starting with. Are you starting with a little 2-inch? Are you starting with a plug, or are you putting in quart type plants? This, what we're looking at here is these squares are probably a little over a quart size, and then he's got some 3.5-inch plants there. Depending on the size of the plant, the desired effect, how quickly do you want it to look like it's been there forever? All right. And then also the growth rate and the habit of that plant. Vining plants are going to fill in a little bit faster than some of the plants that are more of a clumping type. So you've got to take that into account. Just be aware that if you plant too far, the time required for that coverage that you want is going to take a little bit longer, and you're probably going to have to weed the area a little bit more often because you're not going to get the canopy closure that you want ultimately. If you plant them too close, though, you're really wasting time, money, and the plant material. It may look good, it gives you that quick effect, but you probably put way too much plant material in there, so you've put more money into it, you've put more time into it because you had to plant more plants. So you really just have to decide on if it's a vining plant. Normally, my rule of thumb for down here, at minimum, it's a foot center, 12-inch center. Something like Asian Jasmine, you can probably, depending on, again, it depends on your budget. Asian Jasmine, you can probably get by on 18-inch centers if you want to save some money, and it's going to fill in for you. If you've got a clumper, you're probably going to be at least a foot. Some of them, which we'll look at, some of these Ophiopogons are really small and tight. We're looking at maybe an 8-inch center. So that is something that you want to consider. So just be aware of that as you are picking out your plants and the area that you have to cover. Rule of thumb, on average, by the 3rd growing season, you want to see complete coverage. All right. So first year, plant establishment, some new growth. Second year, that growth should continue. We should start to see some of that canopy closure. And then by that 3rd season, you've got the look that you want. And ideally, you want to plant them staggered. This way, they're going to fill in much better. It's going to look a lot neater as opposed to if you just went straight lines, like marching lines down. The staggered look is going to be much better, and it's going to fill in and give you a better presentation. Care afterwards. So I've planted them. What should I do? Weed control is going to be the main thing. You're going to want to go ahead and mulch. Put at least 2 or 3 inches of mulch around the plants. That's going to help. to keep that down. If you did not put in, say we're in the spring of the year and you planted and say you didn't go with that initial 10-10-10, and you want to add some fertilizer, about 4 to 6 weeks after planting is when you can do a fertilizer application. Ideally, maybe in that first year or so, or first 2 years, a spring, summer, early fall application of a 3-1-2 at 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet is going to be beneficial to the establishment of that planting. All right. Any questions at this point before I get into talking about the actual plants?
Yes, there was one. Let me get back to it. All right. Would the layered cardboard/mulch/soil approach work, as well as the digging down 8 inches and adding organic matter then? So I'm wondering, trying to think back what you were covering.
Okay, so I think what they're asking is all right, if I recommended 6 to 8 inches working in the compost, and then they're saying, I know in some of the vegetable gardens they'll put newspaper or cardboard layer down, and then I'm assuming some mulch over top of that. Can you do that? Sure. It's going to break down over time. It's biodegradable. It's not an issue. Just make sure, if that cardboard, you don't want it right up against the plant. You want to make sure there's some air movement there. You don't want, just like with any other plant, when you mulch it, you don't want the plant buried in the mulch because you can have some disease issues. Any other questions?
Oh, nope, that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So let's get into the actual plant material. And like I said, this is not an all-inclusive list. These are ones that, you can easily get. There's some that are interesting ones that probably aren't used as much, but they all have, great interest and bring something to the landscape. Ajuga is one that I really like. It's a clumping type plant. Matures about 6 in bloom, anywhere from 6 to 10 inches tall. If not, it's sort of a rosette type basal growth with the foliage. It gets this blue flower spike in the spring. It works well in the sun or shade. You can see how this one has filled in around these blocks. So it just sort of meanders its way through and fills in. And there's really a lot to choose from with regard to Ajugans. These are some of the varieties: Caitlin's Giant, Burgundy Glow, Chocolate Chip, Burgundy Scallop. And the thing I like is, even when it's not in bloom, you can have interest with this plant in the landscape. So here's Burgundy Scallop. So look how, glossy and textured that maroon foliage is. And then you've got Chocolate Chip, which is a much finer, very clean look to it, but it's got a hint of that chocolatey look to it. So it works extremely well, and there's green and white variegated ones. There's the all green, and so there's a really good template of Ajuga that you can use in the landscape. Asian Jasmine, Trachelospermum, asiaticum. If you haven't seen this, you haven't lived in Texas that long, because it is used everywhere, and it is a hardy plant. It works extremely well. It's a vining type plant. It's going to fill in quickly, and it's very low maintenance once established. You can see this area in this image, probably because of the trees around it. It looks heavily shaded. Turf was just not cutting it, and so they just covered it. They planted with Asian Jasmine, and it works extremely well. So it is probably one of the workhorses on the ground cover side here in the Texas area. But there are other varieties. This Ogon Nishiki is one that, when I was in the industry, we had a gentleman that this was bought in from Japan. And it took us about 3 years to figure out how to propagate it because of the variegation on it. It has very little green. It has this very cool orangey, coppery new growth. And then you can see the foliage is predominantly has some yellow in it with some green flecks. So it is a very slow grower. So this is one where, if you wanted this in your landscape, I would plant this one at a tighter density than the green one, because the green one's going to fill in much quicker than, say, this Ogon Nishiki or this Snow and Summer one, where the new growth has this whitish, pinkish variegation, and then as it matures, it turns green. So, you've got 3 different growth habits here. I mean, the growth habits are the same, but their speed of establishment and putting on new growth is going to be very different from the green versus the green and white versus the yellowish and coppery orange one. Here's another Trachelospermum, but this is Jasminoides, and this is Confederate jasmine. We often see this as grown as a vining plant on arbors and things like that, but it works also extremely well as a ground cover. And you can see those pinwheels, those cluster white pinwheel flowers, the fragrance of it. If you're downwind of it, you are going to know Confederate jasmine is in the area. Great dark, shiny dark foliage, so nice contrast when it's in bloom. But even when it's not in bloom, that foliage just really pops in the full sun. Does well in sun to shade. And 2 of the varieties that are available are Madison and Variegata. Again, Variegata is going to be a green and white version. Hedgeras, English ivy, been around forever. I don't see it used as much here as I did back in the Northeast and things like that, where it was constantly used. But this again is another vigorous grower. It is evergreen. Runners can get up to 90 feet long. I don't think we'll see that here, but these runners will go on it. And so I wouldn't consider it invasive here, mainly because I think our soil types are so clay that it's not as aggressive here. Prefers partial sun. So I would say, if you've got an area that gets morning sun, you're definitely going to want the afternoon shade. Our afternoon sun would probably be way too much for this plant, and it would not perform very well. And there are many cultivars, variegations, different types of foliage types. So I see it some down here, but if you go north up to Dallas, you see it a lot more in the landscape, or even over in East Texas. On the grass side of things, or that grass look, so this is a Liriope, or depending where you live, it's Liriope. But this has that habit of it's a clumping habit. So it's got a little bit wider leaf blade to it, probably about 12 to 18 inches tall, depending on the variety. But you can get flowering in the spring that is purple or white. Again, this is one probably at about 12 to maybe 15 inches on center if I was planning this to cover an area, because of the way that foliage softens up and opens up. The other thing I like about Liriope is, when we do have our breezes and there's wind, it's not a static look. It gives you a dynamic look because it's moving in the breeze. But here's some of the other ones. We've got, green and white. We've got a silvery type one. We have ones that have a green central variegation. So there is a lot of choices out there with this genus. And then we have Ophiopogon. So sometimes people get these two confused, Ophiopogon versus Liriope. Ophiopogon, that the foliage blade is going to be much thinner. And it's got a more compact habit and a much finer texture than Liriope. And this one blooms in the summer, and then you can see the seed pods down here, where the seeds have these almost iridescent blue color to them. So again, something interesting to look at in the landscape. Does well in sun or shade. And there are a lot of different varieties of this one also. You can see this is probably Nana here, and you can see how low growing and tight that is. And that's one where maybe you want to plant it at a little bit higher density to help it fill in. We can see here, they've even got a version, it's a nigrescens, which it's almost like a black, a dark very dark foliage. This one again is going to be a clumping habit, and it's going to be a slow grower because it doesn't have as much of the chlorophyll as say the green versions. So just to be aware of it, and you can see this one tight clumping one here. Looks like cousin it is planted all around the landscape there. Very tight, but it gives a great soft texture to that bed. Fig ivy, Ficus pumila. This will, this will take over time. Can be an aggressive grower. If it dries out, it does not like a very dry area. It likes, it does enjoy the moisture. And then this one, the foliage itself or the stems itself, they have what we call a holdfast. So it will start to climb up any type of structures, fences, walls, and things like that. When we were at Bear Creek, this was growing on the wall out front and actually had a nice look to it. They would come in every now and then, trim it back, and then it would fill in. But this one, these runners can grow up to 30 inches, 30 feet long. So over time, it can get pretty aggressive. And then it's pretty much a green or this green and white variegation version is out there. Here's another ficus that I'm starting to see more in the landscape, which is good because this one I really like. It's got a completely different look to it. So this is Ficus tikoua. This is sandy leaf fig. It is evergreen. It's got a much larger foliage. It's got a coarser, if you felt that leaf, it would feel almost like sandpaper. It's very rough, does well by salty type areas. New growth is kind of nice. It's got a bright green and it contrasts nice against the old, more mature foliage. But you can see it's much more coarser textured. Probably stands about 12 inches, maybe a little bit taller. But you can see in the bottom picture here how they used it to just frame out this bed. And then they have some other grasses and things like that. So it's not always about the flowers, just the textures and looks of the different greens, work really well. You've got the softness of the turf itself. And then as your eye follows up into that bed, you can see the variation of the different colors and textures. Ferns work well as ground covers. This is one I just popped in. This is Japanese holly fern. It has very stiff and dark green fronds, and the spreading growth habit. So it sort of comes up and then starts to spread out. This is one that you're definitely going to want in the, if you have deep shaded areas under trees or things like that. This does not want to see, any type of direct sun, if at all possible. It's going to do much better. The more shade, the better, the happier this plant's going to be. So just be aware, there's a lot of ferns out there. And if you have deeply shaded areas, that you can use these ferns as a type of ground cover. Our woody plants, junipers, they are vertically challenged, certain ones. And so as this one says, Juniperus horizontalis, meaning it's a horizontal grower. So it may only be about 6 to 8 inches tall, but it can get 6 to 8 feet wide. This is varieties that are out there: Wiltonii, blue chip. There's a plumosa. So these work extremely well. I've seen these used on embankments and slopes because once they establish, they're there for good. They're not going to go anywhere. So just gives you an idea of the range of herbaceous type materials, woody type materials, vining type materials that you can use as a ground cover. Euonymus fortunei is one that is in the market. I think it's not used enough. I like it because it's got great summer foliage. It's evergreen, but then this time of year it turns this purple plum color in the winter. So you have some additional interest, and it almost has a bronzy, coppery look to it. And especially when we get this nice, the cold snap that we had, this plant colored up really nicely. So I think it's one that, we should be using more. I know the growers are growing it, but I don't know if the volume or if the landscapers aren't speccing it or using it as much. But I think it's one that works extremely well and should be used more often. Again, very flexible with regard to sun or shade. And here's a variety or cultivar called Emerald and Gold. So on the left-hand side, this is, green central variegation with the gold edges. And then the picture on the right is it coming out of the winter. Okay, so you could see it's sort of got a rosy pink color to it, and then the new growth coming out really sets it off against that background. So, be aware of these things as you know, select your plants, that especially in this time of year, there may be not, you may think there's not a lot that you can work with, but there really is. And there's a lot of opportunities to bring color into the late fall winter landscape. Ardesia, crenata is another very good workhorse. Definitely prefers full shade. You can see it down here in the lower area around this tree. Probably works extremely well. You don't have to worry about weed whackers getting close to the base of that tree. You don't have to worry about compaction. That plant is established, and it softens that base of the tree. Up the upper right-hand corner, you can see the flower clusters, and then you can see the berries that you would see at this time of year. So, when we talked about wildlife and food sources and things like this Ardesia is one that sort of checks all the boxes. Potential area for wildlife to hide out in, or birds to hide out in, but it also does produces berries as a food source this time of year. Dichondra, argentea, this common name, this is why I always call it just Dichondra, silver ponyfoot. I don't know who came up with that name, but it is rather interesting. I really like this more in combinations, which is where I see it the most, and especially here on this image on the right-hand side. It can work as more like an annual ground cover through the summer heat. But in our area, I don't think it will do as well, mainly because of our soils. Now, if you've ever been to San Antonio Botanical Garden in the summer, you will see this in their landscape, and it thrives there because they're drier and their soils are a little bit different. And when you see this in full sun, it almost has a metallic appearance when you see large areas of it. But it is a cascader. So, when we talk about the filler, the thrillers, and the spillers, this is a great spiller for your combination planter. Lysomachia, creeping Jenny, is one that will just sort of meander through wherever you plant it. Low grower, will hold up to foot traffic. You can see here on the right-hand side how it fills in amongst these stepping stones. And then in the spring, we get these bright yellow flowers, cup-shaped flowers that it'll produce. It is evergreen. You'll see green versions of it. You'll see chartreuse versions of Lysomachia, but it's one that it definitely does a nice job in filling in areas, even if it's spots within a flower bed. It adds a nice contrast and a nice look to it. Here's a Texas native, frog fruit. Some of you might think of it as a weed, but this one, it really does extremely well as a ground cover. People now are starting to put this in as their lawn because of its low maintenance and its adaptability. Can you buy the plant? Yes, from some of the native nurseries will have it, but I've seen this along the bayous, whether I'm out for walks or on a run. You can just dig a clump of this or two, plant it out, and before you know it, you'll have a nice little stand and establishment of it. The other thing is it's great for drawing in the pollinators. These little flower clusters look like almost like little lantana. It doesn't wow you. They're whitish pink clusters, but they just always have them, and so it adds a nice look and a nice touch as a native ground cover. And then we've got Vinca major. So this is a large periwinkle. So this has nothing. The Vinca major is not a relative to what we call Vinca on the annual side. Completely different genus. The Vinca that we call on the annuals is Catharanthus, but this is the true Vinca. So this is a ground cover. It will put out long runners, and it will root along the nodes as it touches down onto the soil. Definitely prefers shade. A little bit of morning sun would be fine, but afternoon shade is definitely going to be the key here. Larger foliage, large lavender type flowers with a white center. There is a variegated version of it. And so this is large periwinkle, and then, not to be outdone, we've got the common periwinkle, or Vinca minor. So we had Vinca major, Vinca minor. Difference is smaller foliage, smaller flowers. Growth habit is going to be about the same, though. It's going to root along the nodes of the stems. Some of the varieties on the Vinca minor are balls, silver and gold. So we've got a variegated. And then Ralph Schugert was one I know that we used to grow a heck of a lot of when I was in the industry. So with that, hopefully this gives you an idea, gives you some ideas with regard to ground covers, what to consider. There are a lot of other ones out there. I think the resources, the links that Brandy and Shannon should have put in the text there will help you out with some other options. So with that, team, any other questions?
Yeah, Paul, there were a lot of questions about cold hardiness, obviously with the freeze, and I answered a lot of them, but I know you
Okay.
and I are on different sides of the town, and I'm gonna tell you my observations right now, and see if they reflect what you've been doing. The Vinca looked like it was going to be great, and then days after the freeze, after the temperatures warmed up, there's been increasing browning, but that'll come back. One of the things that I've noticed that really didn't even bat an eyelash mostly was mondo grass. Those leaves have stayed green. What's that? Widelia, that totally died back to the
Yep.
ground. That'll come up. And then of course the Asiatic Jasmine will die back, but that'll come up. So those are some of the things I've been witnessing around where I am. What have you noticed in your part of town?
Yeah, I would say I'm seeing the same type of response. What I'm hoping is, since we went through 2021 and it's fresh in our minds, and there were a lot of plants that I thought we had lost. That well, let's put it this way: there were a lot that really took a hit and never came back. There were ones that really looked rough that ended up coming back. So the plant resiliency especially on these ground covers will surprise you. Don't prune them back yet. Just let them look rough. Let them look nasty. Brown is a color. It's not a color that you want, but just be patient with it. And come the spring, you'll start to see new growth down at the base on a lot of these, and then just go from there. Once we get past March 1st or so, our normal last frost date is considered February 15th. I tell people wait till March 1st. So usually by March 1st, we should be out of the woods for any other deep freezes. So just go with the flow. The plants will let you know if they made it or not, and don't respond too quickly, because they will surprise you and they'll be back.
All right, we have a couple more questions, but I do want to just comment. I love Creeping Jenny, and it goes back to the fact that my mother loved it. And I mean, we grew it in Ohio, so it'll definitely take a hit with the cold, but it'll come back. So that's one that it kind of looks like it's going to be real dramatic, but it comes back. Since you've been talking, we've had two different questions about deer resistance.
Yes, that, off the top of my head, I don't know. So you'd have to look at that list. There may be some of the links, and I don't remember if they have that they're deer resistant. If not, you would just sort of have to, Google that plant and, ask if it's deer resistant or not. I would say the frog fruit would probably be deer resistant. The other ones, I I don't know. I honestly don't know. So it would take a little bit of, research and digging into that to see which ones are and which ones aren't.
Well, and I know also it depends how hungry the deer are.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah,
it can show up in a list that says deer resistant, and
right.
then, you go out and buy it, and then you're like, well, my deer just ate it, and, it depends if it's young compared to more mature. And I think those deer resistant lists are just suggestions at
Yeah,
most,
and yeah, and if you notice the wording, it's never, they don't use the word deer proof. It's resistant. So meaning that if there's something else near it, it's that it prefers, it's gonna eat that first. But as you mentioned, if they're hungry enough, they are gonna go for it, and they'll start to feed on it. They may not take it down to the ground, down to the soil line, um, but they may graze on it. It's something, since we're here in Houston, I don't think about, as opposed to maybe if we were in a rural area, I would consider it more. Um, but in our area, I usually don't worry about the deer resistance. And if people ask, then, you know, you have to do a little bit digging. What I would say is maybe look at also the list, of the Texas Native Plant Society. They may have ground covers listed in there that would be potential deer resistant also.
All right, and they keep trickling in. So
Hmm.
I don't even know. I'm not even sure about this one. What kind can you walk on? I mean, other than like some herbs, what can you think of?
Yeah, the herbs you can walk on, the lysomachia you can walk on. Some of the ophiopogons, the smaller clumping type ones, you can step on. Um, I know a lot of the herbs work extremely well. Um, the teucriums and things like that, because they'll get down, especially in between, if you've got a walking path, the way that image with the lysomachia was. And then when you step on it, you'll break damage that leaf a little bit, and you'll get the fragrance, the aroma of those alkaloids and things like that. So again, another added benefit that you maybe didn't think about. There is the other thing you can do is, I just remembered this now. There was a program, gosh, about 6 or 7 years ago, and it was called Stepables, which was great name for a ground cover program. Um, I don't know if it's still on the market or not, but if you Google Stepables ground cover program, something like that, they may even go into more detail, because that's all they focused on was ground covers. So they may be able to tell you which ones are deer resistant, and they may be able to tell you which ones hold up better to foot traffic. So that would be a good resource to see if it's still out and about.
All right. Let's see. Are any of these plants that you mentioned on the Texas superstar list?
That is a great question, and I don't think so. I'm thinking about it now. All the ones, they look at annuals, they look at perennials. Um,
I'm
I
pulling it
don't,
up.
I don't, you know, quickly in my head, I don't think any of them are, on that Texas Superstar list.
Let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and post this link. I was looking real quickly. I thought there was a ground cover category, but
No, no,
no, I'm
annuals,
not seeing it.
perennials, temperennials, or perennials, they call it. They got tropicals, they have some woodies. I don't think there is a ground cover
I
on the
posted
list. So,
the link for the stepables, Paul.
oh, okay, so it is still out there. Yeah, so that would
Yep.
probably be a good resource in doing a little bit more, and I'm sure they will have more in-depth information on that. You just got to be aware of. Um, I think they are, ground covers are, across the U.S., and I think that the lady, or when they started that, they were out of Indiana. And so
It
I don't
looks
know
like
if
it's being run out of Oregon. So,
Oregon, right? So I
yeah.
don't know if they're heavy on the West Coast side, but it would be a good place to look at for additional information.
And I know it kind of seems, I don't know, like it's being a smart aleck answer, but look around, because that's literally what we're doing too, is, what does well, in the freeze, in the summer. Are you looking around, in your neighborhood and then more commercial areas, seeing what is doing well, because there's a lot of great ground covers out there. And just kind of using your own curiosity will tell you some of the answers, especially, if in your neighborhood, that it's going to do well in your neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. But the other thing is, I always tell people, don't be afraid to try something new either. If all the neighbors have Asian Jasmine and you want to go and try Ardesia or something like that, or the sandy leaf Ficus, go for it. And it's probably going to do well. And some of the other ones, maybe you try it in a small spot and see what happens. I always say, think of this as the Crayola 64 crayon box, and you got something else to choose from. Give it a shot, try it out, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't mean that you're a bad gardener. It just means that that plant wasn't in the right spot, and at least you know that and you learn from it. So.
Yep, we have two more questions.
Sure.
One is, can blue days be used as a ground cover? Seems like it would damage it.
Yeah, I don't think foot traffic wise. Now, if you're going to use it, in the landscape, it okay, as an annual in the summer, an annual ground cover, yes. I had two in hanging baskets that I just put under my patio, and they took a major hit, and so they're probably not going to come back. So, because of the growth habit, it does give you that ground cover look. So, as long as you know it's not going to overwinter and it's not going to be there next year, and you're going to have to plant it again, that's fine. It gives you that ground cover habit. It gives you that ground cover look. And in fact, I think I've seen uh, Centennial Gardens use it in an area, and it gives you that great ground cover look. It's got that, that foliage, and when it's in bloom, it covers the area. But just be mindful that it's probably not going to make it through a winter, and definitely, the cold spell that we had the other week. My plants in pots did not make it. And I even had one in the landscape and it didn't make it. So as long as you know that going in, you'll be fine.
All right. And if this is our last question, then it kind of sets it up for maybe you to mention our Master Gardener demonstration gardens. So are there any recommended sedum ground covers? What was that real bright yellow one out there? Wasn't there?
Hold on, let me. I'm going to have to do a quick look. Yes, it was a proven winners variety. Coral, no. Man, you're gonna.
It was so beautiful, and it was contrasting with, wasn't it, one of those red-leafed crepe myrtles?
Yes. Okay. The short answer is yes. Any of the sedums do great as ground covers. Just remember that they prefer a drier area. They want full sun, but they do extremely well as ground covers. So any of the sedum, any of those succulent type plants, they use them in green roofs. They use them in various other areas with regard to combination planters and things like that. So lemon coral is the one that we have out at GFG. Comes back every year. It came back from the freeze of 2021. The master gardeners, they love it because it just fills in. It looks like a sea of chartreuse, and they prefer it when it's not in bloom. When it's in bloom, they don't like it because it sort of has a shaggy look to it. And it's yellow flowers on top of chartreuse foliage, so the contrast isn't that great. But that plant has been in that bed for, we've had those beds now, what, at least 4 or 5 years, and that plant has not missed a beat. It dies back a little bit, and then all of a sudden, this time of year, it starts to, wake up, and in the spring of the year, it fills in, and it looks like a little sea of chartreuse there. And yeah, if you put some purple colors in there or red colors to the contrast, it just jumps out at you.
All right, well, it looks like we don't have any current questions now. I think that was a really great Q&A session. A lot of great questions, a lot of great answers. Thank you, Paul. I just can't believe I'm saying this, but thank you for your very last homegrown lecture. But don't feel like you're getting rid of us, because you're definitely still going to be on my speaker list for other things. But thank you so much for this. Yeah.
It's been, it's been my pleasure. It's been a joy. I just hope, everybody that's been supporting us, they've enjoyed these. We've got a great resource here. They're all recorded. They're on YouTube channel. So by all means, it's been a lot of fun, and I'm sure it will continue on and be just as good and strong going forward.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you everyone for attending our very first homegrown lecture series in January. We have our next one coming up the first Thursday with Shannon Dietz in Backyard Chickens. And then, of course, always look for our newsletter. We send that out once a month. And there was a freeze. We talked about soil testing, and then freeze effects. So those of you that had some freeze questions, check out your email box and look at that newsletter. And then, of course, we have a podcast once a month that will all continue too. So happy 2023, and we'll see you next month. Thanks for joining.